Coming up on Bridge City News, we discuss how local businesses are faring during the COVID-19 pandemic as we chat with Trevor Lewington from Economic Development Lethbridge. A Lethbridge city official talks about the dangers contaminated materials can have on city staff. And we hear about a hockey equipment manufacturer which is now making protective gear for doctors and nurses during the coronavirus pandemic.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. It has now been 3 weeks since Alberta's first COVID-19 case was identified. The province says there were 67 new cases today, bringing our total to 486 cases, including 12 here in the South Zone. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, says 34 of the new cases were because of community transmission.
Right now, 21 individuals are being treated in hospital, with 10 currently in the ICU. We have also learned that 13 symptomatic individuals from the Mackenzie long-term care facility have now tested positive, an increase of 8 from yesterday. They are self-isolating and receiving care. But I want Albertans to understand there will be challenges coming in the next weeks. We have all seen what has occurred in countries like Italy and Spain. We are doing everything possible to prevent that from happening in Alberta by limiting the number of people who will need hospital care, by preventing the spread of this virus.
Henshaw also says today 27 Albertans have since recovered from COVID-19. Some of the most vulnerable people during this COVID-19 pandemic are the homeless. Officials from various organizations talked to Bridge City News today about protocols in place to keep some of the most vulnerable safe. BCN's Loris Alexander has the details.
The city is making a great effort right now to make sure that the homeless people are being taken care of to the best of their ability. Here we are making sure that everybody that comes in washes their hands first. They have to hit the hand washing station before they come and ask for services. We are doing social distancing with the chairs. They're not allowed to sit within 6 feet of each other. And we're also making sure that we're giving them hope, because the situation feels hopeless and it's taken a while for that hopelessness to filter down to the streets, but now it's filtering down to the streets. And so we are that avenue of hope for them.
Streets Alive isn't the only one. We've spoken to the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen on several occasions, and their response is consistent. It's business as usual.
We have implemented several measures. We make sure that our guests, in particular, wash their hands more diligently than ever. Our volunteers are also asked and required to wash very regularly. All of our volunteers will wear, and staff will wear, gloves. Right now we're following what needs to be done, but I want to emphasize that we realize that it could be a major issue, and it probably is, but for us, it is business as usual.
There's lots of plans in Lethbridge in terms of how to support people who are vulnerable, to protect them around the COVID-19 pandemic. And so at the shelter, everyone who comes into the shelter is screened, and the screening process that we're using is we're taking their temperature, we're disinfecting their hands, and assessing for cough. Those are some of the key things that we're looking for. If people are presenting particularly, we have protective gear, so we have, if someone has a cough or a fever, we can put a mask on them.
With churches closing their doors, food donations and volunteers can be tricky. It's a crisis that needs all of our attention and efforts to make sure the vulnerable have a chance at staying COVID-19 free. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
In order to limit the amount of people who visit the Waste and Recycling Centre, the City of Lethbridge is suspending the free Saturday drop-off program until further notice. The city says this will allow our community to adhere to the COVID-19 social distancing guidelines directed by the province. The centre will still remain open Monday through Friday, but the city is asking residents to only visit the site if absolutely necessary. GM of the Waste and Recycling Centre, Joel Sanchez, says it's important to never put contaminated materials into the garbage bin as opposed to recycling.
If you cough or sneeze in a facial tissue, it's better to dispose of those into the garbage. Make sure residents, we want to encourage them for sure is to bag everything that goes into the garbage and make sure it's tied. All those materials that they think could be a contamination for In terms of biohazards, we recommend for biomedical waste, we recommend those to go into the garbage and not the recycling. That's the main point that we want to make sure. Everybody wants to make sure they're safe. We also want to make sure that our staff remain safe during this time.
The recycling facility in Lethbridge employs around 15 staff members who are required to wear gloves and masks. The City of Lethbridge is looking at relieving financial pressures on homeowners by looking at a potential property tax deferral. Recommendations will be brought forward to City Council over the next few weeks before property tax rates and due dates are set. The current 2020 property tax payment deadline is June the 30th. Anyone enrolled in the TIP program who is seeking financial relief is asked to call Lethbridge 311 to discuss different options. McFadden Honda in Lethbridge is taking precautions to protect its employees and customers in light of COVID-19. As Micah Quinn explains, the company is also providing a second job for employees during these difficult times.
McFadden Honda is implementing new precautionary measures to protect their customers and also their employees.
We started with disinfecting everything. We started with the gloves, making sure that everybody in here is wearing gloves. Technicians, advisors, parts people, absolutely everybody have to wear gloves.
Fretz is saying that social distancing is stressed at the dealership.
The biggest thing and the hardest thing is 6 foot distance, because everybody is so used to getting close and in personal, it's hard for them to keep the distance.
Honda is using their express kiosk to limit the customer reaction when dealing with service appointments.
Great option is the express service kiosk. So when you come in our foyer, it's an enclosed little area there. So you're out of the elements. The customer does have a little sanitation thing beside the machine so that after they've used the buttons and tossed their keys in, they can wipe down with the Purell.
The dealership has employees painting the showroom as well.
We started Monday, TSPing the walls and prepping everything. We got the paint on Tuesday, so that was good. We started painting Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and we're probably 2/3 of the way through the dealership, and it's looking nice and fresh.
It's all hands on deck, and every department is helping paint.
Our technicians, when they're not busy, come up and paint. Our service advisors, our salespeople, if they're not busy, they come up and paint. That way we can avoid sending anybody home.
McFadden Honda will continue to take precautionary measures in order to combat COVID-19, and workers will continue painting the showroom. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
For the businesses that are still open, it is important now more than ever to support them. That's according to Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge. Lewington says investing in our own community creates a snowball effect.
The math tells us that for every $1 that's spent locally in the economy, it has a multiplier effect of creating 7 new additional dollars. Local businesses tend to hire local people, they invest in local events, they tend to buy local supplies. So every dollar that you spend with local businesses, and that can include locally owned franchises, not necessarily just local brands, but every $1 creates 7 more in the economy. And the more we can support local businesses, the faster we can recover from this together.
Watch the entire interview with Trevor Lewington from Economic Development Lethbridge discussing the importance of buying locally. That is coming up after business news. Many grocery stores across Canada and the United States are installing plastic shields to keep cashiers and shoppers from infecting one another as the world struggles through the escalating coronavirus pandemic.
Today's story is all about safety for our customers and our associates. In each of our stores, we have erected plexiglass shields at every register. And those are because when you're checking out, there's not a 6-foot distance as recommended by the CDC between the cashier and the customer. So we've added that as protection, as a shield between the two. And it's just clear plastic. And each time a new cashier comes to the register, it's cleaned. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are new and different about this for all of us, but I think everyone understands the importance of following the CDC guidelines and the importance of adhering to everything we're trying to do. It's really for everyone's safety to prevent the spread of the virus.
I think it's a great protection for customers and people like me that go in, and the cashier safer.
In an effort to help hospital staff, Canadian hockey equipment manufacturer Bauer is offering to modify its production line to make protective visors for doctors, nurses, and first responders. The protective equipment to help deal with the COVID-19 pandemic would be produced in both Quebec and in New York. Bauer has also received interest from Montreal police, firefighters, and hospitals of the new visors. A spokesperson for the company says it's their goal to produce around 2,000 units each and every day. As many sports fans know, Major League Baseball would have kicked off their season today, but they did not because of COVID-19. Video journalist Ainsley O'Reilly was at Spitz Stadium earlier today with an update as to what is happening with the Lethbridge Bulls.
Thanks, Hal. I'm here at Spitz Stadium, home of the Lethbridge Bulls. Their season isn't scheduled to begin until May 27th at home against the Vauxhall Jets. Team president and general manager Kevin Kavame is also the president of the Western Canadian Baseball League. They released a statement back on May 13th saying that they're monitoring the situation and they don't have a current need to decide on the status of the 2020 season.
Thanks so much, Ainsley. At this point, the WCBL says that they fully intend on playing out this season. The Provincial Officer of Health in British Columbia, Dr. Bonnie Henry, says her province now has 42 new cases of COVID-19, bringing the total there to 659. BC Premier John Horgan says his government is taking unprecedented steps to maintain a steady supply of essential goods and services. He says the province and industry leaders will ensure delivery of food, medical, and emergency items through a coordinated supply chain.
We always think, of course, of our healthcare workers, our doctors, our nurses, our care aides, who are our paramedics, ambulance attendants that are right there every day. But we also need to make sure that those shelves are stocked and people get the food that they need. We need to make sure that childcare is available for first responders, frontline workers, not just those critically important health workers, but also truck drivers, warehousemen, people who are keeping the supply lines going.
A doctor in Texas says he and other healthcare workers treating coronavirus patients are nervous about bringing the virus home to their families, but know that people are depending on them during the health crisis.
I think right now, everyone is nervous. I think we all have families. If you ask me, I have 3 young kids at home, a 4, a 2, and a baby. I don't know how, and I think the scary part is everyone responds differently to this virus. And the scary part is, are you going to bring it home to your family? But we are in the front lines. Everyone is depending on us. And so we're there to help. We're there to screen. And the quicker we get on board, and we know this, the quicker we get to patients, the quicker we treat them, the quicker we screen them, the better the recovery, the outcomes. But, when I go home, it's hard. You have to explain to your kids, I got to keep a distance. Dad got to stay away. Because I don't want to get you sick, and the kids don't understand, but it is what it is, This doesn't affect just the elderly. It affects the young and as severe, so don't think you're immune.
Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says the government will enforce a mandatory quarantine for non-essential travelers coming into Canada. She says those who arrived earlier, however, should already be in self-isolation.
Let me emphasize, you should be doing it already. This is a step we can all take to protect the health and safety of Canadians and ultimately to ensure that our economic rebound comes more quickly. I trust Canadians so much. Canadians are great, and people have been making real personal sacrifices to self-isolate and to practice physical distancing. At the same time, I think all of us are going to be and feel safer with mandatory quarantine for anyone entering Canada.
Fresh off news that the Canadian Senate passed a $107 billion aid package for Canadians to fight COVID-19 comes word that Ontario has introduced a $17 billion package to support the province through the COVID-19 outbreak. The influx of cash will support the health sector, direct payments to parents, and tax breaks for businesses.
$17 billion in relief and support for all of you across this great province.
We believe that the $17 billion, $7 billion of direct support and $10 billion of support with cash flow for businesses and individuals will make a big difference in the lives of Ontarians at a very, very difficult time. There, of course, was economic modeling, but we are in unprecedented times. Underlying any economic challenge like the one we faced is a matter of confidence, and in this case, the confidence is a function of a healthcare crisis, a global healthcare crisis.
Ontario has 170 new cases of the coronavirus, bringing their total now to 837. Meanwhile, in Manitoba, the province's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Brent Rusin, says they have 14 new cases, bringing their total in that province to 35. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister is pushing back a promised tax cut and looking at borrowing billions of dollars to cope with the fallout from the coronavirus. Pallister had promised to cut the PST from 7% to 6%, but says that's off the table till next year.
So let's be frank. Our revenue is down. Not a little, a lot. Way down. Because our rainy day savings over the past 4 fiscal years add up to close to $1 billion. And that money is beginning to be put to excellent use now, responding to this historic worldwide pandemic. And its impacts on Manitoba are being felt throughout the province. We're making the necessary investments to protect our healthcare system and all the other important services that are key to keeping us safe. But as our income as a government drops and as our expenses rise, that rainy day money will get used up.
The U.S. Senate recently passed a $2.2 trillion spending bill to combat the coronavirus south of the border and to stimulate the American economy. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden says the aid will help in a big way, but he says the spending requires meticulous oversight.
Implementing this bill is going to take a whole lot of fly-specking, a whole lot of work. It's going to require meticulous oversight on a day-to-day basis. It's going to take a lot of coordination with state and local governments. That's what we had to do when I was in charge of executing the Recovery Act, which was $900 billion over that. That's how we made sure the funds weren't wasted or abused. We're going to need to make sure the money gets out quickly into people's pockets and to keep a close watch on how corporations are using the taxpayers' funds that they receive.
Medical staff at Samaritans Purse are caring for many coronavirus patients at an emergency field hospital in Cremona, Italy. The facility, which opened on March 20th, has been fine-tuned into a specialized respiratory care unit for those suffering with COVID-19.
Hi, my name is Bev Caulfield, and I'm here in Cremona at our respiratory care unit, just next to the hospital in an area that's been hit very, very hard with COVID-19. We've taken in our first patients today. The people that we're seeing right now are obviously in serious condition with COVID-19. We're trying to care for them and hoping to care for them through our staff, but also too just in ventilation, giving them oxygen. The situation is getting worse in areas around us and continues to get worse here. We have a full medical team who are here, ICU nurses, doctors, paramedics, ER nurses, ward nurses who are all here to take care of these patients as best as they can. Continue to pray for the people of Northern Italy and Italy as a whole. I'd ask that you pray for our staff, that you give them strength and wisdom and discernment in the decisions that they have to make. And so we just appreciate your prayers.
Always nice to see the great work that Samaritans Purse is doing. We had sun mixed with clouds, but cooler today. Sunshine and warmer temperatures are on the way later this week and the weekend. Complete weather details are on deck. A beautiful day in the Windy City once again today. Clouds mixed with sunshine, but slightly cooler. Tonight, just a few clouds developing with a low near +1. Tomorrow, mainly cloudy with a high expected near 10. A nice weekend is shaping up. Lots of sunshine at 12 degrees on Saturday, mainly sunny and 11 for Sunday. Monday, partly cloudy with a high of 9. Tuesday, cooling off slightly to 5 degrees. Wednesday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 4. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 8 degrees and an average low of -5. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1946 at 19 degrees. The record low was a chilly -24 in 1955. Sunrise was at 7:20, sunset at 7:53. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, expect periods of rain and a high of 9 degrees in both Victoria and Vancouver. Mainly cloudy and 10 is on tap for Calgary on Friday. Overcast and 7 for Edmonton. Expect a few clouds and 7 for Regina tomorrow. Mainly sunny and 4 for Saskatoon. Lots of sunshine and 6 degrees for Winnipeg. Sunny as well and 10 degrees for Toronto tomorrow. Clearing and 10 degrees for Ottawa. Just a few clouds and 9 for Montreal. Fredericton, New Brunswick should receive some rain mixed with snow and a high of 5. A chance of flurries and 4 degrees for Halifax, Nova Scotia tomorrow. Snow and -1 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect heavy rain and a high of 6 degrees for tomorrow. Despite cuts to key interest rates by Canada's central bank, credit card rates remain high. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Ottawa is talking to the banks about reducing those rates as more Canadian consumers need to use credit to pay their bills.
I can assure you that the finance minister has had conversations directly with the banks about credit card interest rates. We recognize that they are a significant challenge for many Canadians at this point. That is why we are encouraging them to take action to alleviate the burden for Canadians. At the same time as we are looking on our end at making credit more available and less expensive for Canadians to be able to make it through the next few months.
Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation is tripling its insured mortgage purchase program as part of federal measures to deal with the economic fallout of COVID-19. The increase to $150 billion is up from the initial plan last week of $50 billion. By purchasing the insured mortgages, CMHC helps provide funding for the banks that they can then use for other loans to help businesses and other borrowers. CMHC says insured mortgage pools already carry government backing so that there is no additional risk to taxpayers. Nestle Canada is giving workers its factories a temporary wage increase of $3 an hour amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The producer of brands such as Lean Cuisine, Boost, and Kit Kat says it is retroactive to March 16th. Salaried employees in distribution centres will also see an increase. Workers in retail operations that have been temporarily closed will receive full pay up to 8 weeks. Our country's cattle industry has stabilized after seeing a sharp drop in prices when the coronavirus pandemic was declared. Dennis Laycraft of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association says the industry has been working to ensure meatpacking plants remain open. He says his group wants to ensure the market is not affected and is relieved that borders are still open to beef. Laycraft says there must also be recognition of efforts to keep an adequate supply of food available for Canadians. Ford says it wants to reopen 4 assembly plants in the United States and 1 in Mexico next month that were closed due to the threat of the coronavirus. The 3 Detroit automakers suspended production at all North American factories on March 19th under pressure from the United Auto Workers Union. It had concerns about members working closely together and possibly spreading COVID-19. A union spokesperson says the UAW is reviewing Ford's announcement with great concern and caution. Talks of Apple potentially purchasing Disney are heating up once again. Disney's stock has plunged 30% over the past month as the coronavirus forced the company to close its theme parks and postpone its new movie releases. Apple, meanwhile, is thriving, but does the math really make sense? Apple ended last quarter with just over $107 billion in cash, cash equivalents, and securities. Disney, on the other hand, has an enterprise value of $254 billion. Market analysts say it is doubtful Disney shareholders would approve a buyout at the current price. Apple would need to take an additional debt and fork over nearly $400 billion to close the deal. Analysts say purchasing Disney would boost Apple's annual revenue by nearly 30%. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The $2.2 trillion stimulus package in the United States had a big impact on the markets today. The TSX was up 231 points to 13,371. The Dow was up 1,391 points to 22,552. The S&P 500 was up 154 points to 2630. The Nasdaq was up 413 points on the day to 7797. Oil was down $1.31 to $23.18 per barrel. Natural gas was down 2 cents to $1.64. Gold was down 15 cents to $16.31.19 an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $14.41 an ounce. Wheat is currently at $235 per metric ton. Barley's also at $235. Canola is at $467, and corn is at $262 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $3 to $108.55. Feeder cattle were down $1.27 to $132.13, and lean hogs were down $2.95 to $62.25. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 71.30 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, despite cuts to key interest rates by Canada's central bank, credit card rates remain fairly high. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Ottawa is talking to the banks about reducing those rates as more Canadian consumers need to use credit to pay their bills during the COVID-19 pandemic. Trudeau says his government is also looking at extending lower interest credit directly to consumers who need to rely on borrowing to cover their expenses. Supporting local businesses has never been more important. Trevor Lewington from Economic Development Lethbridge has an update as how businesses are doing in our region and trying to survive during these difficult times. We'll have that interview in just a moment. The coronavirus pandemic has created chaos around the globe with concerns over health, also concerns over the economic impact it's having on businesses and their employees. Government restrictions are shutting down many companies. Now, how is this really impacting in Lethbridge? Joining me now to talk about it is Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge. Trevor, welcome back to BCN.
Thanks for having me once again.
Now, every city in Canada is impacted by this huge pandemic. Do we have any idea how Lethbridge is doing so far economically compared to other cities around the country?
I mean, I think like most other cities across the country, Lethbridge is going to feel a deep impact. It's going to be widespread. We have two particular challenges in Lethbridge that make us a little bit different. First, our proportion of small or family-based businesses is about half. So half the businesses in the city have 5 employees or less. Most of those companies with that kind of size don't necessarily have the cash flows or the bench strength to withstand a major disruption like this for a long period of time. And the second challenge is really around the suspension of classes at both the college and university from an in-person perspective. Many of those students have left town, and that's a significant part of our population, particularly folks that are willing to spend on restaurants and bars and entertainment options. So we have a bit of a double whammy with those two factors in mind.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the specific businesses. You mentioned the college, the university, restaurants, theaters as well, and I guess some retail stores also feeling the pinch.
Yeah, I mean, most impacted certainly are the sort of public-facing businesses that we think of, like gyms, like bars, like restaurants. There was some polling done today by another media outlet that actually talked specifically that even those businesses that are still open are seeing traffic declines of 70 to 80%. So even restaurants that are still doing takeout or delivery services, it's a fraction of what they would normally do, and yet your fixed operating costs don't go away. So significant challenge for business owners.
So what are you hearing specifically from these business owners? Most of them still need to pay rent, utilities, or interest on any loans they have, but there's no income coming in. Are landlords maybe giving them a break in their leases?
Well, we are hearing a variety of stories. There are some landlords that have been a little bit more flexible, either a break on a lease or a deferral. The challenge is many of these landlords themselves are a business, and their revenue, of course, is rental income by which they use to pay their bills. So it does affect commercial landlords in the same way that it affects their tenants. The biggest thing that we've heard is cash flows. There's sort of a rule of thumb in business that 1 in 4 businesses in Canada can't withstand a disruption of longer than 30 days. And so 1 in 4 businesses, 25% potentially could fail if they don't have operations within a month. And that number jumps to almost 75% could fail if that extends to 60 days. So finding ways for local businesses to free up cash is a focus for government, should be a focus for all of us. We want to make sure those businesses can survive through this.
When I was talking with Len Binning, the owner of the Movie Mill, he said the same thing too. He says a couple of months is one thing, but like 3 or 4 months down the road, he doesn't know if he can make it, like a lot of other business owners. Have you heard any interesting stories from locals as to how they're making adjustments to keep their businesses going during this pandemic?
Yeah, there's been, Lethbridge, I think, as you know, is a very innovative community. There's lots of creative people here, and we are seeing some of those businesses emerge. I know, for example, Mocha Cabana is a local bistro restaurant. They source a number of locally provided goods, but they have a home meal kit delivery service that they've scaled up. They're actually doing groceries from their farmers market. So talking to the owners there just this morning, they've almost quadrupled their home-based delivery business compared to the prior. So it certainly doesn't offset the fact that their restaurant is closed, but that's an example. We've seen a lot of gyms. So, I know that my trainer, I've been avoiding as much as I can the visual face-to-face conferences. But, a lot of gyms are actually providing one-on-one coaching over Skype and other technologies. They're offering classes and work-at-home routines for their clients. So staying connected with their audience, even though people can't physically come to work. So there's many examples of people embracing those different technologies and finding just another solution to still carry on business. My team specifically, we had a business continuity plan in place, and we were able to have everybody work from home all of last week. So it's not quite the same, but we're still talking to clients, we're still serving needs, we're still holding virtual meetings and touching base every day. So there are some ways to work around this for some businesses.
How is the pandemic really impacting the manufacturing and construction sectors?
Yeah, 2 key sectors in our community for sure. A number of our manufacturers are actually looking to retool their lines. So several have answered the call from the federal government to provide supplies for this pandemic response. So for example, there's one local manufacturer that is looking at one of their production lines to make all of the alcohol-based wipes and all of the alcohol-based gels that are required that are in short supply. So again, it won't take the place of their regular everyday business, but this way they can generate revenues and they can retool to support the pandemic response. A number of our local food manufacturers are, of course, key to the supply chain for keeping grocery stores well stocked. So most of them continue to work with their staff to have alternative crewing arrangements. Ensuring a consistent supply of all of our agri-food products is absolutely key.
You know, it's interesting with a lot of those grocery stores as well. Walmart hiring 10,000 more Canadians to help keep up with the demand, temporary workers. I mean, Save-On's doing the same thing, Safeway. So in one sense, you know, some businesses are still thriving. Now, what kind of help is available from different levels of government for small business owners to help them with their rent, utilities, or to keep a lot of their remaining employees?
Yeah, so each level of government is rolling out programs as we speak. A number of announcements followed this week, as early as today, with respect to being approved by the federal parliament. From a municipal perspective, many municipalities are looking at the deferral of utility payments, looking alternatives payment strategies. I think it's important to note, though, that those are deferrals. They're not reductions or cancellations. So at some point, 3 months from now, that bill still comes due. So although it helps, certainly with cash flow, it doesn't solve the immediate problem of these businesses to have actual more money in their bank accounts long term. The province has announced changes to WCB premiums. The province is deferring WCB payments, for example, to 2021, and the province is paying half of the premiums themselves, offsetting that cost for business. There's also going to be some changes to the commercial side of property taxes, the education component, and the provincial government is working right now furiously with municipal governments to reconcile how that might work. And from a federal level, there are a number of support programs. So I think it's key for all businesses to make sure they clearly understand what's available to them, to research those different programs, but be mindful that it's going to take many weeks for them to see payments. A lot of these programs have just been approved literally within hours of us talking, and so it takes a while to stand up all the administration and the application processes that are required.
So the business owners you've spoken with, are they really saying that there's enough help, or do you think maybe different levels of government should be doing more?
You know, it's a great question. Economic Developers of Alberta conducted a survey province-wide, and they released some of the results just today, actually. And almost 2/3, so about 66% of employers have already laid off staff and plan further reductions in their workforce. That's very significant. Another 60% or so indicate that the financial supports they've received already are just not sufficient. And again, it comes down to many government programs are the extensions of deferral programs, which put off payments, or their loans, their expansion of credit facilities. And what we saw with the disasters in Fort McMurray and High River is that often, 6, 9, 12 months from now, when these loans come due, businesses, in fact, you get a second wave of failures. What we need to see is more governments providing cash in hand, finding ways to support business so that they can in turn put that money into their business and into their staff.
Have you heard of any local business owners planning on maybe going out of business or declaring bankruptcy at this point?
Yeah, I think it's still a little too early to know sort of what those impacts are. I've not personally been approached by anyone who's sort of taken it to that extreme, but certainly it's on the minds of businesses. A lot of business owners have commented the fact that they don't feel they'll be able to survive if this goes on for an extended period of time. So it's definitely a concern out there in the community.
So what kind of feedback are you really getting from the local business owners? How long do they realistically think they can stay in business under the current restrictions? Like we said, 1 month, 2 months, maybe longer?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely, as I said, much smaller businesses in Lethbridge proportionally than everywhere else, and many of them have indicated that it's potentially a couple of weeks. So that's the part that concerns me. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, of course, has indicated that we will not see the peak of infections in this province for at least 4 weeks, meaning that, social distancing restrictions and other challenges will be in place for much longer than that. So it worries me when I hear business owners talking about, well, I can survive a few weeks. We are talking months. And I think, that's the concern. And most businesses have indicated that's going to cause a lot of stress to them.
Assuming that this pandemic clears up over the next few months, what are you hearing from locals as to how long it'll take to get business volumes back to normal?
Well, I think we've heard a number of politicians talk about, quote, the new normal. That's been in the public discourse a lot in the last few weeks. And I think this is, in some ways, a structural reset. So similar to the oil and gas sector, when oil prices crashed a number of years ago, they never quite retooled the same way. They never went back to those same pre-crash employment levels. And I think this is going to be similar. Because it's so widespread, I think businesses are going to think of ways to do business differently. They're going to look at alternatives. They're going to look at online platforms, perhaps instead of in-person meetings. I think fundamentally the landscape is going to look completely different than it does today. So I don't know that it's going to be necessarily the same as it was. It's going to be different moving forward.
We are very much an agriculture-based economy here in southwestern Alberta, in and around Lethbridge. What have you heard from farmers and ranchers so far?
That is in many ways and has always been our saving grace in this region of the province. Of course, we have a much more diversified economy that is supported by a strong agricultural sector. The good news from many farmers that I've talked to is that they see the border controls as being appropriate to limit the movement of people, but still allow trade and commerce. And I think we're very fortunate that the Canadian and US governments have been able to sort some sort of arrangement that allows commerce to continue. The vast majority of our exports, of course, go south, so a significant and permanent closure of the border that's more robust than it is today would have been devastating to the ag community. The biggest challenge coming from the ag sector that I've heard is around the temporary foreign worker program. So there's concerns that our producers may not be able to seed or get their crops in the ground without appropriate labor force. And there have been although foreign workers are not restricted from entering the country if they have the appropriate permits right now, there are some examples here and there where individual border officials have maybe not read the memo or perhaps not enforcing the policies consistently. So for the ag sector, that's a big concern to make sure that their labor force is available to them.
Trevor, are there any coronavirus scams happening in our city that business owners or consumers need to be made aware of?
Yeah, as sad as that is, and quite frankly, I think it's disgusting that people would seek to take advantage of people at a time like this and take advantage of those that are perhaps most vulnerable. There are definitely scams that are going around. Alberta Health has made people aware that some people are getting phone calls ostensibly from a representative of Alberta Health requesting personal and credit card information in order to get their test results. That is not how it works. People need to be very clear. I think, as with all scams, if a consumer ever has a question, make sure you call the business, look at your bill, phone the actual contact number and information that you have. Always ask for verification. And if it doesn't quite sound right, chances are it probably isn't.
How important is it really right now for residents to buy local and support our local producers here?
Yeah, buying local always makes sense from an economic perspective. I'll admit that I'm wholeheartedly biased as the CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge. But the math tells us that for every $1 that's spent locally in the economy, it has a multiplier effect of creating 7 new additional dollars. Local businesses tend to hire local people. They invest in local events. They tend to buy local supplies. So every dollar that you spend with local businesses, and that can include locally owned franchises, not necessarily just local brands, but every $1 creates 7 more in the economy. And the more we can support local businesses, the faster we can recover from this together. And that's things like buying memberships or buying gift cards in advance that creates some businesses with cash flow, even if you don't plan to use those services and perhaps even while they're closed.
Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
It seems that more and more people like the idea of living life in a more natural and sustainable way. But how do you go about doing that? Our guest today has a few ideas on that topic. Mandy Sandbach is the president of the Lethbridge Sustainable Living Association. Welcome to BCN, Mandy.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk a bit about your group, the Lethbridge Sustainable Living Association. What is it all about?
Well, originally the group started in 2012 with a group of folks who wanted to create an eco-village. They recognized there was a need to maybe live in a more sustainable way. Since then, it's kind of morphed and changed into this like grassroots, hands-on, skill-sharing, collaborative approach. And so we have several different initiatives in the community, the Fruit Rescue Program, Permaculture Lethbridge, the Community Clothing Swap. and the Zero Waste Initiative as well. And so through all of those different initiatives, we're able to reach out and start to help people on their sustainable journey, regardless of where they're at.
Now, Mandy, food is one of your focal points. Why is it so important for people to grow their own?
Oh, wow. It's quite a holistic approach, the way the LSLA looks at it. But for me personally, we all have great memories of growing food with Grandma and Grandpa in our garden spaces. It's like something that nourishes our soul. And keeps us in touch with nature, which is really important. But from a perspective of local food production, what we want to see is people empowered to actually start learning these basic skills. There was a time and a place where we had that information sort of shared down from generation to generation, and it hasn't quite been that way. And so what we want to see is people empowered with the skills and knowledge to be able to do that, so that they can first go into their backyards and grow with the space and the soil that they have available, and then be able to assess where they're at for their food needs, rather than having to rely on grocery stores totally and completely. The other thing that it does is it creates this beautiful sense of community as we're gathering together and we're sharing knowledge and we're looking for land, because not everybody has access to land to grow in. And so not only are we growing local food that grows community, but we're also eating cleaner food typically when it does come from shorter distances away.
I have an uncle and aunt that have an acreage out by Bowden, and it was just acres and acres, it seemed like anyway, of peas and carrots. And it was so wonderful. You know, you pull it out of the ground, take it off the vine, crack it open, eat it. It was so tasty and refreshing, right? Yeah. The only thing is when you got to harvest all those vegetables, right? That's a bit of work.
Yeah.
But I guess it's good exercise too at the same time.
Absolutely,
Now,
it's
do you
good.
teach gardening too, gardening skills?
The Lethbridge Sustainable Living, we offer a series of workshops and events and tours of different spaces that are growing. So not just that we teach the skills, but we're taking them and pointing them to people in the community who are still doing that, or are doing different ways to do that. Also, we collaborate with other organizations, like the Interfaith Food Bank has a learning garden. And so me personally, I will collaborate with them to do a series of workshops. And in what you'll see oftentimes in the spring is what's called the Seed to Supper program. And that's a basic gardening workshop. So we cover things like composting, water harvesting, building soil, companion planting, all the things that you need to know to have sustainable gardens.
What about those community gardens? I'm thinking specifically for people in condominiums or maybe apartments, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of folks come to us and say, I'm in an apartment, how am I going to grow? Indoor growing is difficult at best, but sometimes they have a patio, and so you can look at container gardening in those spaces. But we also have community and communal gardens here in Lethbridge. So the Kinsman Park, for example, has a communal garden that's just open for anyone in the neighborhood to come in and participate in. In places like Copperwood, they're actually designing these community gardens to be actually in those spaces. So you can get a plot for community gardens as well if you don't have land of your own.
What about food storage? For many people, that can be a serious challenge.
Yeah, it is. That's another one of those skills, right, that used to be passed down from generation to generation. And so part of our mandate is really bringing back those basic skills and start teaching people how to start preserving, whether it's canning or jamming or pickling or dehydrating, making applesauce, things like that. And so making those workshops accessible financially as well as locationally. And then that collaborative approach comes in again in terms of partnering with places like the Soup Kitchen or the Interfaith Food Bank to utilize their space and teach their clientele as well how to do it.
The first time I tried some of the dried out fruit, such as like bananas, it was almost like banana jerky. It was kind of cool, you know, it was kind of tasty, and I tried that as a kid. I thought, this is really neat. Huh?
Yeah.
And it's healthy too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Better than the alternative with a lot of candies for kids, right?
Absolutely, yeah, especially if we're comparing it to processed sugars and things like that.
Mandy, you have something as well called the Fruit Rescue Program.
Yeah.
What is that all about?
Yeah, the Fruit Rescue Program is an initiative of the LSLA and is a group of volunteers. And so I need to be really clear, we're not a fruit picking service, because you can't just phone us up and we'll come pick your fruit.
Apples, right? Sure.
We're limited by our volunteer base. But what we do is we have a relationship with landowners who have fruit trees and shrubs that they're not able to get to picking. Lots of our seniors can't get out and get their trees picked.
Of course, yeah.
And then we have a group of volunteers. And so what we do is we match our volunteers with our landowners, and we create these picking events where we're able to utilize the fruit. Thousands and thousands of pounds of fruit every year we divert from falling on the ground and distribute it within the community, both to our seniors, the landowners, our volunteer pickers, the food bank, the soup kitchen, lots of different places. Recently, in the last couple of years, the Fruit Rescue Program was able to raise money for a commercial apple press. And so that's allowed us to be really mobile and actually go out to the spaces, pick the apples, for example, on site, and then do the juicing and the pasteurization there, and then distribute it in the form of juice as well.
How about when it comes to vegetables and helping people pick their vegetables? Do you have some Veggie Tales for us?
No Veggie Tales. We are limited again by the amount of volunteers that we have. So what we do offer is the ability to share some knowledge and pass that information around. So part of the community creation is that we have this beautiful foundation for being able to put people in touch with one another so that they can help people out. So for example, if our seniors need certain fruit and they can't get out to pick it, we'll pick a bag and take it to them. And so we try to connect our volunteers in that way, whether it's veggies or fruit. It just happens that we have a real abundance of fruit here in Lethbridge. Sour cherries, pears, apples of all kinds, raspberries, all the berries. So lots of abundance.
Now you encourage people as well to buy local, but doesn't it get to be a little expensive though when you're going to the farmer's market? I mean, you're supporting local producers, which is wonderful, but sometimes people can't afford that.
Yeah, the cost is it's a really veiled process too in terms of the cost. We have lots of different issues within that shopping local idea. From the perspective of sustainability and regeneration, we always want to support local because we want to keep those people employed. We want our food to have the least impact miles-wise, kilometers-wise, fossil fuel-wise that it possibly can. And so cost becomes one of those things that we vote with our money
And
on.
maybe less pesticides as well?
Absolutely,
on all
way
those fruits
less,
and vegetables,
absolutely.
right? Which is healthier for you?
Absolutely. So there's always this like organic or non-organic conversation, and I think it's less about that and more about what are the ethics of how the farmer's grown it, how close is it to me? Do I have a relationship with these people? That's a really important thing to consider. And so the other thing that you can do to keep the cost down is buy in bulk. So one of the things we offer as an organization is a cooperative ordering group where we can order large volumes and divide it up and you get it at a discount. All farmers have an ugly crop of carrots or potatoes that they can't sell in the store. And so you can approach the farmers if you have a relationship with them and say, hey, I'm happy to take your ugly beets or potatoes or carrots at a discounted rate. And that's often what happens. So there's ways around that cost.
That's a great idea. I mean, they're still
Yeah.
healthy for you.
Yeah,
You're still
absolutely.
getting the same nutrients, right?
Yes,
Vitamins
absolutely.
and minerals.
And better nutrients because they haven't been transported so long as what they would be if they came from California and things like that.
Let's talk about free-range meat and eggs. My father used to love, when I was a kid, buying the Hutterite chickens, he used to call them, right?
Yes, yeah.
And because they were so big and plump and they were healthy, they weren't plumped up artificially, right?
Mhm,
How
yeah.
important is that too?
Oh, it's really important. I think the important piece for my belief and what the LSLA tries to share is that you're asking questions. Who's your farmer? Where are they? Do you know them? Do you know what their practices are? And so it's less about spray or don't spray or plump them full of things or not, and more about just knowing that piece of it. Again, is short amount of distances our meat and our eggs come, the better off it is, the more nutrient dense it is, the better quality it is. And so you'll find that there's lots of farmers, local farmers, especially around Lethbridge, who may not be organic, but they're using ethical processes and they're not putting anything excess into the animals that needs to be. You can actually go out and witness the way they're farming. And so that's really great. Once you've had a taste for clean meat, I'll call it, free range is sort of, there's so many terms and it depends who's selling the product in terms of like what it actually is. But ask those questions about how they treat the animals, take a tour. But once you've had a taste for it, so we used to have our own eggs when we lived out of the city, and everybody we gave our eggs to, they're ruined for store-bought eggs anymore because there's such a difference in quality and taste
right?
and texture. Yeah, and so it becomes in high demand. And that becomes a quality of life thing that you choose for you and your family. And the cost, you find ways around that. So.
What about when it comes to clothing? Do a lot of people still like to make their own clothes?
Oh, wow,
Outside
yeah.
of grandma making the mittens and toques for the
My grandma
wintertime?
made so many of our clothes, and at the time I did not appreciate it, and now I definitely do. I don't know a ton of people who make their own clothes. I do know a couple of people who make them fashionably, but another option that we have are the things like our community clothing swap, where we gather donations of clothing and then we redistribute it. There's hundreds of thousands of pounds of clothes go into landfills every week of the year on the planet, and so if we can distribute that locally and get it moving within the economy here in town, then you don't have to buy that many extra clothes. There's no reason for that to be. So we provide that opportunity through our clothing swap.
Mandy, some people just don't like buying used clothing.
There's certain
They're
things
like, ew! You know how many sleeves and
Absolutely.
pits have been on this shirt? Like, no.
Absolutely.
So how do you convince people that, Why buy
Yeah.
new when used will do?
Yeah, I don't believe in convincing people for anything. You either hear that call or you don't. And that's kind of how we function as an organization. We just want people to know we're here if that does feel right to you. There's certain items of clothing I won't buy used. I will only buy new, or I'll make on,
undergarments,
on
for
my
instance, right?
Absolutely. And what we ask for from our community when they're donating is gently used. So if it has holes and you're not wearing it, we don't expect somebody else to wear your nasty socks. Like, that doesn't need to happen.
That ain't right.
No, it's not at all. But you can find some really great, name brand if that's what you're into. We have
Well, like
lots
my kids,
of things.
Oshkosh, that was a big thing way back when.
Absolutely. And my kids now as teenagers, they have like Champion and Adidas and all the things like that. We have those things donated. And when it's happening on a regular basis, you know that you can purge your closet, get a new group of clothes that, fills that gap if you want to feel like you've had some new clothes without a big cost associated with it.
Now, sometimes you also host make your own cleaners events.
Yes.
What are they all about?
Yeah, so that's another collaboration with the Purple Carrot here in town, and that's something that I do. So the LSLA will sometimes host that, and other people that we work with will. So the do-it-yourself cleaners is just really an introduction to how else we can make our own cleaners. So rather than bringing a bunch more chemical and plastic ware into the world, we're going to teach people how to make their own basic cleaners as well. And they work really, really well. There's this notion that the only way we can clean is by using bleach, for example. And there's tons and tons of studies
Well, for
talking.
mold, I know bleach really
Absolutely,
helps,
and it works
right?
really well, and there's a time and a place for it.
Right.
But just our general cleaners, if we're just cleaning the bathroom or we're doing windows, vinegar and water works pristine to clean a window, for example. And so
Does it matter what kind of vinegar, like white vinegar?
I would use a white vinegar,
Okay.
yeah. So sometimes the apple cider vinegar, for example, is a little thicker.
Right.
But we want to empower people and inspire them to start looking around their kitchen to see how else they can use some of the supplies they have. So everything that we do and everything that we teach, no matter what the workshop is, will always be accessible. You don't have to buy a bunch of fancy things in order for it to help, in order for you to be able to use it. And the DIY household cleaners things about education, and then making their own, taking them home and trying them, and then they get to play with that formula and see how it works better for them.
I remember many years ago I was talking to an environmentalist saying to me, if you ever want to wash your vehicle, park it on your lawn. That way the water is going to go right into the grass and you can feed your grass at the same time,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Instead of out on your driveway or the sidewalk on the street, right? But what kind of natural soaps or detergents would you recommend as opposed to the store-bought brands?
Yeah, so there's a product called Castile soap. It's a basic hemp soap. In some of our stores, what we have a really...
Can you use that for vehicles?
No, not for vehicles specifically,
your
just
hands.
regular
Okay.
formulation for regular soap. Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
Castile soap I would use for making like a liquid hand soap in a foamer pumper
How about
with
for
some
vehicles,
essential
commercial?
oils.
Is there anything?
I would use the same thing for the vehicle.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely. You have to be aware of formulation because some of the products, all the products, will leave a film if you have too much of it. So it's a bit of experimentation in terms of how it works for you, right? Most of the people I speak with aren't so much concerned about their vehicle. It's more about how am I going to clean my kids and my clothes and my kitchen counter and my bathroom. So part of what we want to inspire in people is this really creative process. So here's some information. Build on it, play with it, formulate it the way you want to, the way it works for your life and your journey, because not everybody's going to start by making their own cleaners. Maybe they start in a different way on their sustainable journey. And so we want to always leave it open so that they can actually make those choices for themselves.
I've tried some of those handmade soaps, with the oatmeal and the honey, and oh, it's just amazing. The smell and the texture and the feel, and it's so worth it. And it lasts a lot longer than the commercial soaps, right?
Yeah, it does.
With all the chemicals.
Yeah.
Now, what about zero waste? You guys actually have a zero waste social gathering. What's that all about?
Yes, we do. So it was sort of inspired by Southern Alberta Zero Waste, which is the group on Facebook, and we've kind of taken it under our wing. So what we've realized is nobody needs any more meetings in life. Nobody needs any more sort of like strict, rigid spaces. So we just want to create a social event. And what we're doing is leaving it up to the people who are attending those to really decide what we're doing. So for example, last month we gathered in a space, we had some tea, some snacks, and we made reusable tissues and reusable paper towels. We just cut up some extra fabric and we all came in and made ourselves a set, and then off we went. So we're going to do a bit of a skill share. Every month it'll be something different. It might be like a documentary, it might be just somebody sharing a skill with the group. Might make some reusable products, it just depends.
Mandy Sandbach, president of the Lethbridge Sustainable Living Association. Thanks so much for joining me today in studio.
Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.